Hello again, everybody. This is Dan Clouser, and welcome back to the Journey of My Mother's Son podcast. I'm joined with fellow author Juliet Rose. Juliet, thanks for joining me today.
Thank you so much for inviting me on. This is awesome.
Absolutely. Looking forward to the conversation. Always love connecting with fellow authors, and you're also a bit of a traveler as well, so we'll talk a little bit about that too. But before we get started, just take a minute and introduce yourself to the audience. Who is Juliet today?
Who is Juliet today? That's a good question. I am an author. I'm also an artist. I am a traveler, although I have had my feet in one place for a while now. I'm actually in the mountains of North Georgia, originally from New York, and I've lived all over the country. But I've been in place for about 7 years, which is the longest I've ever been in place in my whole life. So,
cool. What inspired you to start writing initially? I know you said that from a very young age you felt the need to be a writer. What was it about writing that you really inspired you?
When I was really young, I was a voracious reader. I read everything. I was reading well above my grade level, and from there I kind of like to tell my own stories. So we'd get off the bus and we'd walk back to our houses, and I would just tell stories. And I always joke that they started out as truths and then they became lies. I just kept elaborating, and so I think one day it just dawned on me that being a writer was a thing. And so I went to my mother and I said, I want to be a writer. I want to be an author. And so she bought me my first typewriter when I was 10. Really like my teens, I definitely packed stories away and submitted things in school and, kind of did, I think, what kids do. And I started to kind of get noticed from like teachers. They're like, hey, this is really good. Or where'd you come up with this idea? And so as time went on, my confidence grew and I just knew this is something I wanted to pursue.
Yeah. And very similar to me. I mean, I just, people ask me all the time when I started writing, and I loved writing from a very young age. I remember when I was like 10 or 11 years old, writing a newsletter for my brother's adult soccer team just on notebook paper. I'd write it out each week and hand it out to the players and their wives and girlfriends, along the sidelines. They'd all read it, and it was just a really cool experience for me. And just always loved writing. And it wasn't until we started traveling full time where I really embraced the fact of making a living out of writing. It was always just kind of something I did. So you've published, I think, 7 books now, is that correct?
Yeah, so I have 7 books that are published. I have an 8th that's coming out next month.
Okay. So how old were you when you published your first book?
Well, so kind of interesting to go back in time. So like I said, I always wrote and I entered stories. And then in my 20s, I had a daughter that was diagnosed with cancer. And so obviously I shifted gears during that time, take care of her. And she did pass away. And after she passed, I wrote a lot of nonfiction articles. My goal at that time was really just to reach out to other parents, anybody that might be affected by that. And so I really didn't write stories again until into my 30s, like about halfway through my 30s. At that time, I actually published a book, which is no longer in publication because I changed my pen name and I went through a divorce and all kinds of fun stuff. So I pulled that one out of publication. And I was a single mom. So for the years when my kids were little, I didn't write. I didn't write again until I had kind of a pivotal birthday a few years ago. And I said, it's now or never. I need to suck it up and get back to this. This is really what I want to do. And so in the last 3 years, I've written these books.
So you've published 7 in 3 years.
Yeah.
Impressive. Or 8, actually, 8 coming up. So that's very impressive. I mean, I've published 3 in the last 3 years, and I thought that was quite a task. So to do over twice as many as that, kudos to you, because that's some serious writing for sure.
There's nothing like seeing the finish line in the distance and going, all right, got to push now. And so it's been a push, to get this done.
Yeah. Well, and what was the when you published your first book, what was that feeling like when you kind of got that first copy, that author proof, and paged through it, and kind of the reality of, wow, I'm this close now to being a published author?
Well, because I went through it twice. I went through it, my 30s, I had published a book, and then it's had a publication. And that was pretty like remarkable at that time. And I actually weirdly had similar experiences. I had both times gone through and had publishers. And I ended up in both scenarios having to break ties with those publishers and then go on my own. So the second time around, I don't know why I did it again, but I had 3 different contracts offered to me, and I was like, yeah, I'll just do it this way. But I think between COVID and everything else, one of them folded. One of them, he just kind of quit responding to people. One had a really, really sketchy contract asking for way more rights. And so I decided to go on my own again this time after those experiences. And so I had that kind of experience twice. And I have to say it was more monumental this time for whatever reason, getting that proof, when you get the first proof, and I had it in my hands. It just meant a lot more. I don't know if it was age, or if it was experience, or what happened, but this time around, it really was like, okay, I'm doing this. Like this is really happening. And so it's been a really, really cool experience.
Yeah, I can definitely relate to that. And then it's funny what you said about being with a publisher and then ultimately going out on your own. And same thing for me. I was with a publisher and ended up just a really bad experience, and pulled my IP from them and just republished my first 2 books independently. And my third book, I didn't even seek out a publisher, just went straight independent. So tell me a little bit about that kind of thought process to you, and if a publisher approached you now, would you consider it, or are you kind of 100% into just independently publishing at this point?
I think it would really depend on the contract and what they were coming with. You want to come and give me a huge advance and do a lot of the work, that's great. My intent when I went with the publishers the second time around is I work a full-time job and I have a lot on my plate, and I thought there's just no way I can also self-publish. So I went to the publishers, but it was such a headache. I mean, I wasted a year just trying to get contracts back, and had to go through the Authors Guild and get their legal help to break a contract on one of the books. And so it would have to be somebody very, very legitimate, and they would have to come with a big offer, simply because that was such a waste of time. And what I learned in that experience is there's a lot of people calling themselves publishers right now who aren't doing the work.
Yeah. Yeah. At the end of the day, it comes down to, unless you're already a big name celebrity who, you're going to sell hundreds of thousands of copies just because it's printed. You're literally pretty much selling 1 book at a time. So you're doing the marketing, you're out there doing the events and that sort of stuff. So that's kind of what I found as well. Unless it's some sort of ridiculous offer, I'm really not interested in going down the road of
Exactly. Yeah.
working with the publisher at this point. Independently publishing is definitely my my weapon of choice at this point. So
Agreed. Yeah, no, agreed. Like I said, it's not something I even really kind of consider. It would have to be somebody coming to me and being like, we want to offer you this. And I knew that it was legitimate, that I'd even consider it. I have no qualms about independent publishing. I know what I'm putting out there is good. I've won 32 awards for my book, so I know that. And, I did that to kind of prove that point too. I know that what I'm putting out there is comparable, if not better, than a lot of the traditionally published books. So, to me, I'm happy with it. It's a lot of work. I mean, that is, I do still have a full-time job. And so I'm squeezing it in early in the morning. I'm squeezing it after work on weekends, but I'm still really pleased with what I've done.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. And, what, what's kind of the theme of your books? They're all fiction, correct?
They are all fiction, and I do kind of go cross genres. So I basically write contemporary fiction to kind of supernatural, paranormal, to horror, dabble in sci-fi. But what I always say is I have really character-driven stories. So even though I dabble in different genres, I really, really have characters to the forefront of the story and let them really kind of express who they are through emotion and through what they're going through. And so even though I've had quite vastly different genres, everybody that's read my books always says, yeah, but it's you. Like, I can tell that you wrote this story, that there's just something very similar in all of them, despite the genres.
Right. Right. Very cool. Um, any thoughts on ever breaking away from the fiction?
I think because I did nonfiction after my daughter died for so long, I really kind of feel like I tapped into that. Not saying I would never write something again that would be like maybe a self-help or a nonfiction. But there also comes something with age where you start thinking, maybe I got to stop thinking I'm an expert and just, stay like in the fiction world, I can kind of just be creative and do what I want. In nonfiction, you really are trying to tell people something. And I'm kind of past the point of trying to tell people something. I think I am.
No doubt, no doubt. So let's just shift gears a little bit and talk about travel and how that's had an effect on you. So you said you've kind of in the same place right now for 7 years, longest you've been in one spot. But prior to that, you were a bit of a wanderer. How did those experiences affect who you are today?
Tremendously. I mean, I actually don't kind of understand what it's like to not be a traveler in the sense of like I've seen so much in my lifetime. My mother was she was a deadhead and a hippie, and so we traveled in an RV all across the country, into Mexico, went to Canada. Um, and so I had that from a very young age. By the time I was 10 years old, I was living in the RV. And she passed, when I was not quite 12, she passed away. And then I lived with different family members. So I kind of moved around with that. Got out on my own at 16, moved around with that. And then my first husband was actually in the military. So we moved around the country quite a bit. And when I finally got to a point where, I was like, I kind of want to stop traveling as far as living. I want to start like living in a place and maybe traveling as I want versus always being on the road. And that's when I got this house, and I've been here 7 years. But now, we're already talking about an RV and, traveling again. Because once you've done it, I think that, you just feel like when you're sitting at home, sometimes you think, wow, right now I could be in like New Mexico hiking up a trail, instead of sitting on the couch. So I think it's always in your blood once you've done it.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely is. I mean, just little leg that we're on right now. We started in Pennsylvania. Actually, went up to Niagara Falls, back down Pennsylvania and into Virginia, West Virginia, Kentucky. Um, Now in Missouri, and we'll be heading across Kansas into Colorado and doing a little book signing tour throughout Colorado. Um, and yeah, it's definitely one of those things that if we're in one spot for a long time, I absolutely start to get the itch,
Yeah.
to be on the move, because it's for me it's tough to be in one spot. I like to be on the move for sure. What was one of the things that you loved most about that travel experience?
I think the thing that really is, even to this day, is really stuck with me is just getting to see so many different cultures. Like when we're in one area, we tend to see one thing and how people are. And when you travel, you just get to see like such vast differences, even just miles apart. Like you're from state to state, from food to food. It's just getting to experience the world in a different way. And that's really what I miss about it still, is just being able to like that go to stop at a street fair somewhere in Arizona, or maybe go up in Colorado and go skiing or hiking, and getting to see kind of how the world is so different just beyond our doorstep.
Yeah, yeah, that's this country is so vast that I don't think some people who haven't traveled really understand the different cultures right here within our own country without even getting into Canada or Mexico, or traveling
Exactly. Yeah.
abroad. Like, it's just the cultures from New York to Georgia are completely different, which you can certainly
Completely
speak
different.
of.
Completely different. I'm still adjusting to that, and I've been here for years. So.
Yeah. But I think that's one of the beautiful things about our country, is that there are just so many different cultures. And like you said, get into Texas and New Mexico and Arizona. I mean, it's all completely different down there as well. So it is really cool. So I'd love always being able to talk to somebody else who's experienced it and kind of get their take on it for sure. So
Absolutely. And the food, I'm just going to say that again, the food that you experience all across the country is just amazing. Like, yep.
yeah, we just had some barbecue in St. Louis, and trying to figure out, we've now had Memphis barbecue and Texas barbecue, and we're heading to Kansas City shortly. And it's like, you can't really, they're all amazing in their own way. They're all a little different. And it's like, which one's the best? And,
Yeah.
you can't say it, they're just all that good.
Absolutely. It's like pizza. Pizza everywhere is different, but it's all so good. So,
Yeah, no doubt about it. So that's very cool. So the the book that you have coming out in the very near future here, what's the title of that one?
It's called In Dreams We Fly.
Okay. And what's kind of the storyline of it?
So this one actually, I always said I'd never write a memoir, and it's not. But I took elements of my childhood, and it's about a little girl whose mother passes from cancer, and she moves from New York to North Carolina to live with her aunt and her cousin. And in the process of being there, she happens to see somebody dump a body in the woods. And so she runs because they see her. And so she runs and she ends up at this shack, this old like shack in the middle of North Carolina woods in Wilmington. And she's hiding out there, convinced if they find her that they'll kill her. And she finds a door in the floor of the shack. And long story short, that leads to the past. And so she ends up in 1929. She is a biracial child. So she ends up in 1929 in the South as a biracial child. And luckily she has a companion who is kind of showing her the way, but she's trying to get back home. And of course, in the process of that, she learns a lot about kind of like the past and how we're all interconnected. And that time travel requires human connection, basically, to get to where she's going. So that's kind of the gist of it without getting too much into it. But so that's the one that kind of gets a little sci-fi, but it's really more of like time travel.
Yeah, that's very cool. It's very cool. Where, you know, with these different storylines you come up with, like where does that creativity come from? I mean, like how does that inspiration come and, get it onto paper?
I think it's just there. And that's I've always tried to figure that out. So where do you come with story ideas? And I'm like, it could be literally me taking the dog out to get the mail and a story idea will pop in my head. Or I'll hear a song or a memory of something will just be like, oh, that'd be a good story. And really that's how it happens. I could be reading a nonfiction article, like with my wildfire book. I was just reading an article about wildfires and I was reading about how they use prisoners to help fight wildfires and came up with a story out of that. So it's so random, like, and I don't outline, I just kind of let things come as they will. So what I start with sometimes is vastly different than what I end with.
Yeah, very interesting. Very interesting. My most recent book was actually a children's book. Kind of my first jump into children's books. It's written as though our dog was actually the author, so it's
Cool.
kind of fictional, kind of true. The
Yeah.
14-year-old golden retriever's perspective of life in the RV.
Uh-huh.
And that tapped into a different type of creativity for me. So my first two books were both memoirs. So it's kind of interesting hearing you talk about you know where that comes from and that sort of thing. So um, it is neat to see how you tap in, how that creativity creates the different genres and stuff like that. Because I also do a blog as though he's the author, and again, that's a totally different kind of style of writing and different creativity than my own blog is my own writing. So like I said, it's kind of just neat to hear how others tap into that creativity, and if if you tap into the creativity or if the creativity taps into you almost sometimes.
For sure. Yeah. I think it's having an open mind. Like I didn't write for a lot of years just because I couldn't. I didn't really have the time. I was raising my kids and I was working. And, when I did go back to writing, I literally was laying in bed one night and I thought, how did I used to write? Like, how did I used to get these ideas? And I just let my mind open and wander. And I just had this image come to me of a woman sitting, looking at the beach inside of a car. And you could tell she'd been chewing on the sides of her thumbs, like she had anxiety. And that's where my book Do Over started. It was literally that image that popped in my head because I allowed it to,
Right.
because I stopped and said, okay, how do I do this? Let me just open my brain. And I think that is part of it. It's like we have to be open to the creativity that's trying to come to us. And if we are, then it does find its way in.
Yeah, very cool. Very cool. So, is there anything that we didn't talk about that you think would be beneficial to the listeners?
Not that I can think of. I really enjoy talking to you because of the travel side of it, because that's something we both share and it's really unique. And I think a lot of people read my books and they think, oh, your books are all over the place. But like I want to share that experience with people, and this is a really cool way to do it.
Yeah, yeah. But I think a lot of times people want to put us in boxes, and they don't understand that you can be all over the place and still be you. Like that's just part of being you. I mean, same
For
with
sure.
me. A lot of people, um, you know, they don't get how you know we're all made up of so many different aspects, whether it's, musical influence or sports influences or whatever the case is. But at the end of the day, it doesn't all have to match. It can be mix and match. So I love the fact that you're kind of all over the place in the writing for sure. So if anybody's looking to grab your books, to reach out to you, where can they find you at on the internet?
I have a website. It's authorjulietrose.com that has links to purchase my books. It has links to all my social media. It has my email address. It really is the best way to kind of reach out to me initially.
Love it. Love it. So, Juliet, that brings us to our final question. As you know, the subtitle of the podcast is Many Little People in Many Little Places, which comes from the opening lyrics of a Michael Franti song, Gloria, which go, when many little people in many little places do many little things and the whole world changes. So it's one of the little things that Juliet does on a daily basis to make the world a little bit better place.
I think what I do is exactly what we're doing here is I communicate, and I'm open to meeting new people and hearing people's stories. I think so often we're busy in our lives that we're just kind of rushing past and we forget to stop and just share those simple moments with other people. And once we start doing that, we realize how we're all interconnected and how important that is for the survival of us.
Yeah. Yeah. Very important. I love that. I love that, especially in today's day and age of just such a polarized society. I mean, we still are very much connected, regardless of what some of those beliefs may be. And regardless of what mainstream media may want to tell us.
100%. Yeah, we all want the same things. We want love, we want companionship, we want, neighbors, we want a safe world to live in. So I think once we recognize that within ourselves, we are able to connect past all of that were shoveled in our direction. So yeah.
Love it. Love it. Juliet, I really appreciate the conversation. This is a lot of fun. Wish you the best of luck in your future books, and as well as all the ones that are out there. And you definitely have put me to task that I feel like a slacker right now after what you've done over the past 3 years. But it'll all come in due time. So really appreciate the time. For folks out there listening, be sure to check out my other podcasts and blogs at journeymymotherson.com. While you're there, pick up a copy of one of my books. And again, Juliet, thank you so much for the time. This is a great conversation.
Thank you. I had a lot of fun.
You bet.